Ravel Morrison. Sir Alex Ferguson told Harry Redknapp that Morrison was the best 12-year-old I've ever seen in my life. By 16, he was training with United's first team alongside youngsters Pogba and Lingard in an FA Youth Cup winning side. Ferguson later revealed Morrison was the only young player who ever wrote him a thank you letter after his debut. The talent was otherworldly. Morrison could glide past defenders like they were traffic cones, had the vision of a seasoned playmaker, and struck the ball with venom most Premier League veterans would envy. But the off-field issues kept piling up. Witness intimidation charges, assault allegations, multiple court appearances before his 19th birthday. Ferguson, who'd managed Cantona through his controversies, admitted defeat. Ravel Morrison might be the saddest case, he wrote. He possessed as much natural talent as any youngster we ever signed, but kept getting into trouble. United sold him to West Ham for £650,000 in 2012. He had flashes, a brilliant goal against Tottenham that reminded everyone why United paid attention. But the pattern continued. Loan spells, disciplinary issues, moves to Cardiff, then Lazio. By 25, he was bouncing between Mexico, Jamaica, and now in the second division in United Arab Emirates. In a 2021 interview, when Morrison heard Ferguson's message that the boy had a good heart, he was just beaten by his background, his response was haunting. If I could go back in time, I would change 90% of my life.
Francis Jeffers.
The Fox in the Box. At 16, making his Premier League debut at Old Trafford. By 20, he was supposed to become Arsenal's £8 million answer to their striker problems. Arsene Wenger believed he'd found his clinical finisher. The Scouser had everything: movement in the box, natural finishing, and ice in his veins when one-on-one with keepers. At Everton, he'd scored 20 goals in 60 games, becoming their youngest ever Premier League scorer. England's under-21s top scorer with 13 goals in 16 appearances. When Arsenal came calling in 2001, it felt inevitable. Wenger compared him to the great poachers, saying he was that fox in the box we have been talking about. But then came the injuries. Ankle problems, shoulder issues, multiple setbacks that kept interrupting his rhythm. At Arsenal, he was stuck behind Thierry Henry and Dennis Bergkamp in the pecking order, which also explains how 3 years ended with 22 appearances and 4 goals. A Community Shield red card against Manchester United was his final Arsenal moment. Loan spells followed, back to Everton where the magic had gone, then Charlton, Rangers and Blackburn, each move a step down the ladder. By 30, he was playing in Australia. By 33, non-league football with Accrington Stanley. The Fox had lost his bite.
Jack Wilshere.
February 16, 2011. Arsenal versus Barcelona, Champions League. A 19-year-old kid from Hertfordshire stepped onto the Emirates pitch to face the greatest midfield trio in football history: Xavi, Iniesta and Busquets. What happened next was football alchemy. Wilshshire didn't just compete, he dominated. 43 passes completed out of 46, spun past Iniesta like he was a Sunday League defender, left Messi chasing shadows. Even Pep had to acknowledge the performance, admitting that Wilshshire was a top player. Stuart Robson called him the best English talent since Paul Gascoigne. That night, he looked unstoppable. A stress fracture in his ankle during a friendly against New York Red Bulls 4 months later changed everything. What should have been a 4 to 5 month recovery became 18 months of complications, surgeries and setbacks. The player who made Barcelona's iconic midfield look ordinary was suddenly fighting to get fit. He'd return with glimpses of what he could do, PFA Young Player of the Year in 2011 and that gorgeous team goal against Norwich, but the injuries kept coming. Ankle, foot, leg, calf. By 25, he was struggling for game time at West Ham. By 30, he'd retired, having played just 197 games in 14 years. Cesc Fabregas said he could have made it big time at Real Madrid or Barcelona. Instead, he became the clearest example of how injuries can rob a player of their full potential.
David Bentley, the new David Beckham.
That's what England boss Steve McLaren called him in 2007. The comparisons weren't just about the right foot, though Bentley's delivery was every bit as venomous as Beckham's. It was the confidence, the swagger, the belief that he belonged among the elite. At Blackburn, he was unplayable. A hat-trick against Manchester United on his first start. 7 goals and 13 assists in his breakthrough season. Rovers fans voted him Player of the Year. When Tottenham paid £15 million for him in 2008, it felt like a steal. But something died when he moved to North London. The joy, the freedom, the love for the game. He scored in a 4-4 North London derby, but it felt hollow. Loan spells in Birmingham, West Ham, and Russia followed. Each one confirmed what was becoming obvious. The magic had gone. In 2013, at 29, he shocked football by retiring. "My love for the game went a little bit," he admitted, arguing that football had become too robotic, boring, and predictable. The player who'd lit up Ewood Park couldn't handle the corporate machine football had become. He walked away to run restaurants in Spain, leaving fans wondering what might have been if football had stayed fun.
Adnan Yanuzi.
September 2013. Manchester United are heading for a 1-0 defeat away against Sunderland. An unknown 18-year-old Belgian steps off the bench and changes the game with 2 stunning goals. In a matter of weeks, he went from academy prospect to David Moyes' chosen one, the heir to Ryan Giggs, United's future. That season, Yanuzi lit up the pitch, starting in the Champions League, humiliating defenders with nutmegs, the kind of talent that made you put your phone down and stare. England, Belgium, Turkey, Albania, everyone wanted him. Even Nike signed him up on a boot deal. But after Moyes was sacked, Yanuzi became football's forgotten man. Louis van Gaal didn't fancy him. Loan spells to Borussia Dortmund and Sunderland achieved nothing. From 2013 to 2016, Yanuzi played 50 games for United, providing 5 goals and 3 assists. Now 30 years old, at Las Palmas on loan from Sevilla, he's carved out a decent career, but nowhere near the superstar trajectory that seemed inevitable that night against Sunderland. The boy who looked destined to be United's next great winger became a footnote in their post-Ferguson struggles.
Freddy Adu, the next Pele.
That's what they called a 14-year-old kid from Ghana when he signed the most expensive contract in MLS history. Here was a player who seemed destined for the Premier League, destined to light up Old Trafford and the Emirates, yet he never even got close. $500,000 a year, plus a $1 million Nike deal that put him alongside Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods. Phil Knight, Nike's chairman, said Adu had the potential to accomplish more than any of them. At 14, before he could drive, before he'd even hit puberty. The hype was stratospheric. Pepsi commercials, praise from legends. God gave Freddy the gift to play soccer, Pele said. If he is prepared mentally and physically, nothing will stop him. Sports Illustrated covers, MTV interviews. The MLS was dying in 2004, desperate for a savior, and this kid was supposed to be it. On his debut, 24,603 fans packed RFK Stadium, 10,000 more than the previous season's average. The Freddy effect was real. Attendance spiked league-wide. Everyone wanted to see the boy wonder. 2 weeks later, he became the youngest scorer in MLS history. 5 goals and 3 assists in his debut season. Not bad for a kid who should have been worried about homework. But here's the cruel truth about being anointed at 14. There's nowhere to go but down. Manchester United gave him a trial in 2006, but work permit issues killed the dream. Benfica paid $2 million for him in 2007, but he couldn't crack their first team. Then began the nomadic years. Real Salt Lake, Aris in Greece, Çaykur Rizespor in Turkey, Bahia in Brazil. 15 teams across 9 countries. By 2018, he was playing for Las Vegas Lights in the 2nd Division. Now 34 and retired, Adu's career serves as a warning about the dangers of overhyping children. The player who once seemed destined for the Premier League never even made it to any of Europe's top 5 leagues. A humbling reminder that potential, no matter how dazzling, means nothing without the right development.
Federico Mada,
April 5th, 2009, Manchester United 2, Aston Villa 2. 91st minute. A 17-year-old who'd never trained with the first team receives the ball from Ryan Giggs. What happens next is pure football poetry. A shoulder drop that leaves Curtis Davies spinning, then a curled finish into the top corner that sends Old Trafford into delirium.
Comes out to Giggs. Great turn by Makeda!
Screamed Martin Tyler as the unknown Italian wheeled away in celebration. The kid who'd been watching Villa score from the bench just 30 minutes earlier had just saved Manchester United's title challenge. 1 week later, he did it again against Sunderland. 2 games, 2 last-minute winners, and suddenly Makeda was the hottest property in football. Ferguson called him to his office that Friday and told him if he played well for the reserves against Newcastle, he might make the squad for Villa. Makeda scored a hat-trick. He was a pure instinct player, the kind who could conjure magic when it mattered most. That debut goal was voted United's goal of the season. He'd arrived like a comet, burning bright across the Manchester sky. The following season brought just 1 goal in 10 appearances. A disastrous loan to Sampdoria in Italy netted 1 goal in 16 games. QPR was even worse. 6 appearances, no goals. By 2014, United released him. The boy who'd saved their title race couldn't even make their squad 5 years later. Cardiff City gave him a chance, but 8 goals in 2 seasons suggested the magic had died. Now 32 and playing in Greece for Asteras Tripolis, Makeda remains a cult hero at Old Trafford. That goal against Villa will be replayed forever. But it's also a reminder that one moment of genius doesn't guarantee future success. Sometimes the most spectacular debuts isn't the beginning of greatness, but the actual peak itself.
Jack Rodwell. At 16, he was Everton's youngest player to compete in Europe. By 21, he was an England international with over 100 appearances for the Toffees. David Moyes called him an elegant midfield player with things he needs to work on, but we've got high hopes. When he scored that brilliant solo goal against Manchester United at Goodison in 2010, picking up the ball near the halfway line, gliding through their defence and finishing past Van der Sar, it felt like England had found their next midfield maestro. Manchester City paid £12 million for him in 2012. It should have been the making of him. It was the beginning of the end. Injuries hit hard. Competition was fierce. In 2 seasons at the Etihad, he made just 16 league appearances. When he did play, the magic had gone. The move to Sunderland for £10 million in 2014 was supposed to be his resurrection. Regular football, a chance to rebuild. Instead, he became the poster boy for everything wrong with modern football's finances. £70,000 a week to a player who went 39 league games without a win, a record streak of 1,370 days. The Netflix documentary, Sunderland Till I Die, captured the club's desperate attempts to offload him. By 2018, his contract was terminated with a year remaining. The boy who'd looked destined for England's midfield for a decade was a free agent at 27. Brief spells at Blackburn, Sheffield United, and now in Australia with Western Sydney Wanderers tell the story of a career that reached its heights a long time ago. Anderson. Manchester United paid £30 million for him in 2007. He'd already won the Golden Ball at the U17 World Cup, scored the goal that got Grêmio promoted to Brazil's top flight, and dazzled at Porto. Ferguson's brother Martin watched him for weeks and came back with one message: sign him immediately. His first season was electric. Elegant touches, Brazilian flair, a penalty in the Champions League final shootout that helped United beat Chelsea. The future looked limitless. But football careers are fragile things, and Anderson's was about to shatter against his own lifestyle choices. Rafael da Silva, his United teammate, revealed the painful truth years later. We could be on the team transport and pass McDonald's, and Anderson would jump up impulsively and yell, "McDonald's! McDonald's!" He picked up a lot of big injuries, and his problems with eating started to affect him. If he had been a professional football player, he could have been the best in the world. The warning signs were there early. A car crash in Portugal after an all-night party in 2010. Patrice Evra bringing him burgers at 1 a.m. Ferguson fining him £80,000 for returning to Brazil without permission. Weight fluctuations. A cruciate ligament rupture that ended his 2009-10 season. Michael Owen summed it up perfectly. He was very talented, but he had that Brazilian attitude, maybe too relaxed at times. He loved being out there with a ball at his feet, but didn't bother with weights or anything. He was a really good player, but if he had that driven mentality, he could have been great. 8 years at United, 4 Premier League titles, and a Champions League medal doesn't sound too bad. But by 2015, at age 27, he was released and back in Brazil with Internacional. They were relegated for the first time in their history. Next stop, Coritiba, also relegated. The boy who should have inherited Paul Scholes' throne became football's greatest example of raw talent, undone by discipline and misfortune.
Nile Ranger, the most troubled talent English football has ever produced. At 18, Newcastle handed him a 3.5-year contract after he'd scored 15 goals for the under-18s and won the Word Jackie Milburn Trophy. On his first senior start against Leicester, he won Man of the Match and received a standing ovation. The future looked bright, but Ranger's story was already written in darkness. Excluded from school, sent to a specialist centre for children with behavioural problems. At 10, signed by Crystal Palace alongside Wilfried Zaha. By 12, stealing phones from classmates and selling them to criminals. Before his Newcastle breakthrough, he'd already been sentenced to 11 weeks in a Young Offenders Institute for armed robbery in Muswell Hill. Football gave him a lifeline, but he kept cutting the rope. Photos with replica weapons, drunk and disorderly charges, homophobic comments that earned FA fines, criminal damage to taxis. The list grew longer as his football career grew shorter. In 2013, Newcastle released him by mutual consent. Swindon Town gave him a chance. 8 goals in 23 games, but constant lateness and more arrests. His Blackpool spell lasted just months before he abandoned them mid-season and moved back to London. Southend United offered redemption, but in 2017, he was jailed for 8 months for online banking fraud, conning a woman out of £2,000. Released early for excellent behaviour, ironically enough, Ranger tried again with Southend. His goal celebration after being freed involved removing his boot and miming a machine gun. Even redemption came with controversy. Now 33 and playing for Kettering Town in non-league football, Ranger recently admitted, "I had a decent career, I was on decent money and then I messed it all up. If I had behaved, I would have stayed at the top." Ranger destroyed his own talent through choices that put him repeatedly on the wrong side of the law. The boy who could have been English football's next striker icon became a lead example of how character sometimes proves to be more important than the actual talent. These aren't just stories of failure, they're reminders that in football, like life, potential and destiny are two very different things.